This week on the show, we discuss NetBSD 9.0. The release process has started. We look at xargs a little bit closer. Then we tell you a tale of two spell checkers. We look at the second part of the adapting TriforceAFL for NetBSD. We also take a closer look at exploiting a no-name kernel vulnerability for FreeBSD and more in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 311, Conference Gear Breakdown, recorded for the 14th of August 2019. Hello, I'm your host, Benedict Wojcik.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Welcome to this week's episode. We have some nice things in there, not just the usual headlines and other sections, but also something special that people have asked a while ago, and we thought, we might as well take them up on that. But that's a little bit later. First, it's headlines this week. And we have NetBSD 9.0. The release process has started.
Yeah, and they have quite a few interesting things available.
This might be something we might see at a future conference, but for now we have the announcement on the NetBSD announce mailing list from Maya Rashish, and goes like the following. If you have been following source-changes, you may have noticed the creation of the NetBSD 9 branch. It has some really exciting items that we worked on. First thing there is the new xargs64 architecture support with symmetric and asymmetric multiprocessing support, aka big.little, and support for running 32-bit binaries, as well as UEFI and ACPI support, always good to have, and support for SBSA/SBBR, the server class hardware. Oh, very cool. One more architecture on NetBSD's under their belt.
But yeah, the big.little stuff is quite interesting, especially having a scheduler that can understand that I have some fast cores and some slow cores.
Will be interesting to watch that. Then there's the FTT-ization of many ARM boards.
So that's the flattened device tree. It's a way of describing what hardware exists on something like a Raspberry Pi to the operating system.
Yeah, so that they know what peripherals are connected and on what's on the board.
Yeah, so like in your regular x86 computer, you have ACPI as a way for the computer to ask the hardware what's there and basically get a list of all the devices that are there. But on these little single board computers, they don't really have that.
That's why there's FDT, the flattened device tree. Okay, so the 32-bit generic kernel lists 129 different DTS configurations. And the 64-bit generic 64 kernel lists 74 different DTS configurations, so that's quite something already. And all supported by a single kernel without requiring per board configuration, so you don't need to run a certain kernel for that specific board, which could be a big explosion in configurations. It's just one generic kernel, either 32-bit or 64-bit, and that has the bits in there to detect what kind of board it is.
Yeah, that's quite useful to have just I remember when FreeBSD got to having a lot of different ARM stuff supported by a generic kernel. It made a big difference.
So one kernel to rule them all. And then there's the graphics driver update, always good to have, matching Linux 4.4, adding support for up to Kaby Lake-based Intel graphics devices. So that's good to have. And of course, ZFS has been updated to a modern version and seen many bug fixes. They don't write what kind of version.
They ported from FreeBSD. I know the initial effort was based on a version from early 2018, I think. But I think they've caught up further. I'll have to actually go and investigate a little bit and see where they are. But I think they're not far from like FreeBSD 11.0 or something like that.
Ooh, okay.
So getting up to basically useful versions of ZFS.
That are stable enough or production ready.
Yes, it'll be interesting to talk to them about the post Open ZFS world and so on.
Yeah, whether they want to pull in from upstream at one point or from FreeBSD.
Sadly, it's a little late for them. If this effort had started a bit sooner, they should have maybe been one of the second test cases for this. But
they have a bit of catching up to do still. But it's good to see that ZFS is on NetBSD as well and maturing. Then there's new hardware accelerated virtualization via NVMe.
So that's their that's the one that's a backend for QEMU, right?
The hypervisor, yeah.
They have like they have like 3 different hypervisor efforts going on at once.
Hmm.
But yes, I think NVMM is a accelerator for QEMU, kind of like KVM. And then they have also a port of Intel's HAXM, which is a different backend for QEMU, but is HAXM itself is kind of cross-platform. It works across, I think it's Windows, Linux, and NetBSD and Mac. And so that one's also interesting.
Yeah, so then there's NPF performance, the new PF or the NetBSD PF. They have performance improvements and bug fixes, and the new lookup algorithm, THMAP, is now the default. So I know that George Neville-Neal will give a talk on NPF at EuroBSDCon. That's certainly interesting to see. Then they list NVMe performance improvements, always good.
Yeah, I think NVMe is kind of pushing performance bounds in every operating system just because hyperparallel and just really high speed.
Yeah, definitely good to have in your system. Then they have optional kernel ASLR support and partial kernel ASLR for the default configuration.
Yeah, so you have the option of full ASLR, but the default is just partial to avoid making it harder to debug and any performance penalty.
And then some of the kernel sanitizers we covered in a couple of BSD Now episodes. K-leak, detecting memory leaks. K-SAN, detecting memory overruns. And then KUBSAN, KUB-SAN, detecting undefined behavior. So all of these make for different test cases, for different scenarios. And it's good to have those sanitizing the kernel a little bit. They have been used together with continuous fuzzing via the syscaller project to find many bugs that were fixed. Yeah, we reported about that in a number of BSD Now episodes, I remember.
Yeah, it was interesting to get to see how some of that works. Mark Johnson gave a presentation at the Waterloo FreeBSD hackathon about using syscaller on FreeBSD, and it was interesting to see.
Further in the list is the removal of outdated networking components such as ISDN and all of its drivers. Yeah, ISDN still, it's had its high time, and I guess it's...
I think that ended a while ago, so yeah.
It's good that it's out of the system, so it's not loaded too much with old craft. So then the installer is now capable of performing GPT UEFI installation. Yes, with these future systems only being UEFI capable, it's better to have that, and GPT as well. Then they have dramatically improved support for userland sanitizers, as well as the option to build all of NetBSD's userland using them for bug finding. So you can go on a hunt yourself. And then they have some update in the graphics userland. Mesa was updated to 18.3.4, and LLVM pipe is now available to several architectures providing 3D graphics, even in the absence of a supported GPU. Ooh. They ask that everyone's testing, so we try to test NetBSD, they write, as best as they can. But your testing can help NetBSD 9 to become a great release. Please test it and let them know of any bugs that you find. And the binaries are available in our show notes. They are linked there to the NetBSD.org website.
Yeah. So next we have a little Medium post about using xargs. So he says, xargs is probably one of the most difficult to understand of the Unix command arsenal, and of course just means that it's one of the most useful too. So for a quick bit of background, the xargs utility takes a list of arguments on standard input, and then generally what it does is it takes that list and it breaks it down. If you've ever tried to do something like rm star in a directory, and it says too many files, or argument list too long, you can only put so many commands or file names in a command before that command line is too long for the kernel buffer. But it's not the number of items, it's the length of each of those file names. And so it's kind of dynamic. So what xargs does is let you give it the whole list, and it will break it up into the longest possible commands. So it'll, if you do that, pipe it into xargs, and then rm, it will delete as many files as it can at once and run rm a second or third time if it has to deal with the list. But you can do other things, like if you do the -n flag, you can say, do 15 at a time or something, and lots of other options. Anyway, back to the article. It says, I discovered a handy trick that I thought was worth a share. Please note that there are probably other or better ways to do this, but I did my Stack Overflow research and found nothing better. So they say, using xargs to back-reference command line arguments, even post, sed, grep, etc. So xargs, at least now I've mostly used, is handy for taking more some number of lines of input and doing work on each of those. So he says, this is an example of how to find files matching a certain pattern and rename each of them. It sounds so trivial, and it is, but it demonstrates a cool trick. Although I will explain why it's always not great. So they're doing ls, grepping for any files that contain AAA, then piping that into sed, and basically printing it twice, but the second time replacing AAA with BBB. Then they pipe that list into xargs-n2. So this will try to put 2 things on the output of each line. So it will print 2 file names and then 2 file names and then 2 file names, rather than normally what it would do is print all the list as one line unless it was too long, and then it would break it. Then they're piping that into xargs again, but with the flag capital L. Capital L1, which is call the utility for every number lines read, in this case 1, so that it will run it once for each line rather than combining lines. Because by doing the -L1 there, it means that if you change the number in the previous thing, it will always do that many commands. And they're running bash-c move $0 to $1. And so the output is this would actually find the 3 files named file AAA 1, 2, and 3 and rename them to file BBB 1, 2, and 3. Now, there's some problems with that. Doing ls and grep, you can get weirdness. If file names have spaces in them and stuff, it can cause you problems, and so on. So the better way to do that is probably to use the find command, and find any files that contain AAA. And to deal with the spaces, there's a cool trick. The find command defaults to printing out the list of matching files. But if you do -print0, all one word, it will print them out separated by a null byte, which is something you can't have in a file name. And so when you do that, when you pipe it into xargs, if you give it the argument -0, it will know that everything up until a null byte is all one file name. So just because there's a space in it doesn't mean 2 separate files. It could mean that's all one file. And this is how you can make this safe to do on file names that might have spaces or other weird characters in them.
Yeah, just in case you're not fully aware what kind of content your files have and want to be on the safe side.
But yeah, doing find and all your stuff -print0 and pipe that into xargs -0 and feed it to a command is quite nice. Other interesting thing you can do with xargs is the capital P flag and a number will run that number of commands in parallel. So if you need to delete a lot of files, if you do find on them, pipe it into xargs like that, and use like -n16 capital P8, it will run 8 RMs at once, each one deleting 16 files. Because if you only do one file at a time, you'll spend too much time starting and stopping RM. If you do too many files at a time, you might run out of files. Like if you're doing 128 files on each RM, you're going to go through your list of 5,000 files awfully quickly. So finding the right mix there, you can run a lot of RMs in parallel, but each one having a decent amount of work.
Yeah. So you might as well let the other CPUs do a little bit of work than just the one spinning up all the time.
Especially if you're deleting large files in ZFS, it can take a little bit for each one. And sometimes just deleting multiple files in parallel can get it done faster. So
my biggest problem with xargs is writing it. I mostly, at the first time, write xrags instead of xargs. So that's a common typo. But then I figure, okay, I didn't do something wrong in the actual command line. It's just the typo.
For me, it's remembering the difference between capital I and capital J. So the way xargs works is you run it, you have all your switches, and then the last argument is a command, and it's going to append all the file names onto it. But sometimes you need to do something to the file where file name you want it to substitute isn't the last thing on the command line. And so that's where the %sign thing comes in. But I think when you're doing it parallel, capital I and capital J are different. And I don't remember off the top of my head which one's which.
That's why there's a man page.
So I will admit, is one of those commands I often have to look at the man page, but the man page always has the answer right there. And yes, I've constructed all kinds of great xarg stuff. Even one where I used the find command to find all the files, all of these XML files, then some grep to pick out one of the statements in the XML that has a file name in it, strip out files that are not videos, giving me then just a list of video files, and then feeding that into xargs and saying, tell the application I would like to purge this list of video files. So I'm combining, a whole bunch of different commands in there.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about the Unix shell, that you can just add another pipe, just one more.
Well, yes, because my first reaction when seeing the command they're running here is like, why wouldn't you use a bash for loop across star AAA star rather than in doing ls grep?
Yes, that you can save this first pipe, yeah.
Well, it's not even about saving the pipe. It's that, ls, it can depend on the environment variables and stuff. It might print columns instead of just a list. And there's a bunch of other, some, if you do ls-l or something, it could have a longer version, and, people alias commands and stuff. And so, yeah, lots of times where I wouldn't actually like them to do that. But the sed is nice.
Oh yeah, you can definitely comment on that Medium post and provide some better tips or some shorter command line.
Yeah, because I admit, if I was presented with the same problem, which I've actually have been many times, I often do a suboptimal one with a shell loop where I would end up running sed once on each file instead of on the list of files, which isn't as good, obviously. But
yeah, first you make it work, and then you make it faster.
Well, I'm going to loop over 100 files. It's going to make a difference of a number of milliseconds which way I do it. If I'm not going to be doing this once a minute, then it probably doesn't matter.
All right, it's time for the news roundup this week. We have a tale of 2 spell checkers from package source. This might sound a little bit weird, but this is exactly the stuff that we want in this episode or in this show. It starts like this. This is a transcript of the talk the author gave at Package Source Con 2019, which we covered last week and just briefly mentioned that it happened. And it's about spell checkers, but there are much more general software engineering lessons that we can learn from this case study. The reason the author got into the subject was all that paternal leave last year, when he finally had some more time to spend working on package source. Is that what paternity leave is about, by the way? It was a tiny item in the enormous to-do file on the top of the source tree, and that made him go into this rabbit hole. Okay, so here's the short history of spell checker. Spell. The oldest spell checker, spell, appeared in version 6 AT&T Unix, but it was actually written before that in 1975. The great Doug McIlroy, who's also the inventor of the concept of the pipe, by the way, worked on spell, added it to Unix, and wrote a 1982 paper. Then today, NetBSD still contains a version of spell in the base system.
Yeah, I think spell was one of the original examples of using a pipe.
Yeah, so here's a word, check it, spelling. Yeah, here's another one. To say that spell is not user-friendly is an understatement. You give it a text or a trough file to check, and it outputs a list of all the misspelled words on standard out. It supports both kinds of languages, British and American. And in American mode, it flags all British spelling as incorrect and vice versa. This includes verbs ending in -ize, eyes, needing to be written with an ISE ending, which is highly questionable form of linguistic point of view too. Ooh, okay, here starts the linguistics.
It really depends if you default to American or British.
Okay, then there's iSpell and aSpell. Next came a program called iSpell, which stands for Interactive Spell. Its main innovation was interactive operation. It would stop when it found a misspelled word and presented you with suggestions for what you meant. You choose the correct spelling, and iSpell replaces it in the text. It supports different languages, and there is a comprehensive set of dictionaries. And then there's aSpell, Advanced Spell, ? Set out to replace iSpell as the standard spell checker. Its main distinctive feature was that its suggestions are far better than the ones that iSpell provides, even better than Word 97, woohoo! As the documentation claims. It also understands encodings, including UTF-8, which is a big deal for most languages. Both iSpell and aSpell are in active use today. The dictionary formats are different. So that's one of the discrepancies. Okay, so now then there's a little section on a digression on agglutinating languages. So imagine that you would like to spell check a text that is written in Finnish. The problem with writing a dictionary for Finnish, though, is the near infinite number of words that it would need to contain. It is an agglutination. It's already a difficult word here.
Agglutination.
Agglutinating language, which means that you can stick words together without a space. It's like German. Excellent. That's my language I'm going to learn. As an example, consider the word. Oh wow. Which is composed of individual words for plant, room, and phenomenon, and means greenhouse effect.
Yeah, so the Finnish word for greenhouse effect is plant room phenomenon, which is kind of literal.
It's close, yeah. So such composites do not obey vocal harmony rules. Indeed, this is one way to see where the separation is. In addition, there are also 15 different cases for the noun. A number of prepositions is replaced by case, as in a suffix, and some cases use the strong stem, some of the weak stem of the word, etc. Yeah, that's why I couldn't figure out where one word ends and one starts. So what do you have to do if you would like to keep the dictionary as small as possible? Easy. You take a team of linguists and have them carefully model all the rules of word construction as a library. Such a thing exists, in fact, for Finnish, Voiko, for Turkish, Zemberek, and for Hungarian, Hunspell. Yeah, I heard of Hunspell. Hunspell is particularly interesting. While it does contain special word formation rules for Hungarian, it's also an excellent spell checker for more languages. You can use aSpell dictionaries, but it's faster and gives even better suggestions, apparently. So using Hunspell is a fairly popular choice among users, no matter what language. And then they talk a little bit more about needs more abstractions and a messy enchant2 transition. But then it goes into package source land. Back in package source, we tried to make enchant2 the only enchant version in the tree and failed. As stated above, almost no software has explicit support for checking enchant-2-pc. So they resorted to a trick not to have to patch all the configure scripts, and there's a little bit of code for it, and make files.
So they basically symlink enchant-2.pc to enchant.pc.
So have a single package build, and then they can do that because no enchant1 files are present in the tree. But what broke the whole thing was PHP. Of course. PHP-enchant supports only enchant1. Worse, to translate the entire API, including those deprecated bits, to PHP. So there's no way to make it using the newer version. If you were to remove the APIs, they are no longer provided. Software using PHP-enchant might break at runtime. This is not acceptable for web applications. So this is where they're stuck. And yeah, then they have a general advice for library authors. In spite of a conclusion, they would like to offer some general advice if you are the author or maintainer of a library. The most important is this. An incompatible v2 of a library is like a new product. Yes, importantly, this means that if you stop maintaining version 1, the moment you release version 2, it is as if you had abandoned your library and created a new one. Think of other projects that depend on you as customers. That's their advice there. Think about migration paths. Think about the cost-benefit ratio of an upgrade to your customers. Consider sending pull requests to your customers. If you look at package source, Debian, etc., it is easy to see what other projects depend on your library. Many of them are on GitHub. All of them probably have a way of sending patches. Send them a patch to upgrade the dependencies. Do the work for them. Otherwise, you're developing for no one. Yeah, because then it's unlikely that your new library, as good as it might be, will ever be adopted.
Yeah, nobody wants to be in, Python 3 land forever.
Yeah. So provide a path forward.
It took them like 10 years to get anybody to adopt Python 3.
Well, it took a while, yeah. And then burn all the past bridges because we only want people to run the newer version.
So next up, we have part 2 of adapting the TriforceAFL, which is a different way of doing fuzzing, to NetBSD, part 2. So this is a post by Aikul Pilali, who's a GSOC student for 2019. And they say, I've been working on adapting TriforceAFL for NetBSD's kernel syscall fuzzing. This blog summarizes the work done until the second evaluation period as part of GSOC. If you want to see the first part, there's a link in the notes here. So for a feedback-driven mutation-based fuzzer, like Triforce, fuzzing can be generally improved by providing it with proper input test cases. The fuzzer can then alter parts of the valid input, leading to more coverage and hopefully finding more bugs. The Triforce NetBSD syscall fuzzer itself was a working fuzzer at the end of the first evaluation, but it was missing some proper input generation for most of those syscalls. A greater part of the time during this coding period was spent adding and testing basic templates for a majority of NetBSD syscalls. Scripts have also been added for cases where more complex input generation is required, and this should now allow the fuzzer to find bugs that previously would not have found. So far, there are templates for 160 of the 483 syscalls in NetBSD, like exit, fork, read, write, open, close, etc. So I have some interesting ones like compat_50_wait4, which is, the wait4 syscall is compatible with NetBSD 5, I'm guessing. But, lots of other stuff like link, unlink, etc. There's a separate script called Gen2 to generate trickier input cases for some other syscalls like bind, set sock opt, connect, send to, receive from, mount, etc. So reproducibility. The fuzzer uses the simplest way to reproduce a crash, which is by storing the exact input for the test case that resulted in a crash. This input can then be passed to a driver program, which will be able to parse the input and execute the syscalls that were executed to make the crash happen. A better prototype reproducer has been added to the fuzzer that provides a more human-readable and executable C code. This C code can be compiled and executed to reproduce the crash. So if you give the developer some C code that crashes the system, it's a little easier for them than if you give them basically some assembly or something that is much harder to read. So they have an example here where you see a bit of C that calls syscore sysmincore, and that results in one crash, or this other one where you do mprotect and then mincore, etc. They say the reproducers currently do not include the allocated memory and such, so not all reproducers will actually work. More improvements are to come, but this will hopefully make it much easier to reproduce some of these crashes. And so they have some results of the fuzzing, finding different syscalls causing problems. And lastly, the Triforce NetBSD syscall fuzzer has now been available as part of package source in the work in progress tree. The package will require you install TriforceAFL as well, which was ported earlier as part of the project. And all the changes can be found in a GitHub repo with a link here.
Ah, great. So people can look at that.
Yeah. They also have a script recording. So if you're not aware, the script command allows you to record a bunch of things you do on the shell. A TypeScript recording of a working TriforceAFL fuzzer setup and execution is available. So if you want to follow along and be able to get it running on yours, then you can do that. And then they have a list of the future work that needs to be done, including restructuring the files. Currently, the file structure needs to be modified to suit the specific use case of the host and target being the same OS. Right now, files are separated into host and target directories, but that's not required. The testing and sanitizers are enabled. Until now, the fuzzing was done without using the kernel address sanitizer or the kernel undefined behavior sanitizer. Testing with these enabled and fuzzing them will be a major focus of the third coding period for Google Summer of Code. Improving the reproducer generator, as I talked about a minute ago. There's some scope of improvement in the prototype been added and incremental updates from there. Also, analysis of crash reports and fixing those bugs and writing up some more documentation on it. So, in summary, so far the Triforce NetBSD syscall fuzzer has been made available in the form of a package source package with the ability to fuzz most of NetBSD syscalls. In the final coding period of GSOC, the plan is to analyze the crashes that were found up until now, integrate the sanitizers, and try and find some more bugs, and finally wrap up with some detailed documentation. And they would like to thank their mentor, Kamil Rajtowski, for helping them with the process and guiding them and making this Google Summer of Code an excellent learning experience.
Oh, yes, yeah. That's always good to have good experiences from the students and outcome for the projects that is useful. Okay, no week goes by when there's a new vulnerability been discovered. Our next item has something like that, exploiting a no-name FreeBSD kernel vulnerability.
Yeah, so this is over at sysactive.
Synactive?
Yeah, sorry, synactive, not sysactive.
Oh, syn and ac and tif. Okay, yeah, that's how it is.
So this is from 2 weeks ago or so. A new patch has been recently shipped in FreeBSD kernels to fix a vulnerability, CVE 2019-5602, present in the CD-ROM device. In this post, we will introduce the bug and discuss how you can exploit it in a post-SMEP FreeBSD version. A closer look at the commit that fixes the bug shows that when invoking the IOCTL cdioc read subchannel _ sysspace, data is copied using the bcopy function instead of the copyout primitive. Because I'm guessing the _sysspace part means it's supposed to be copying to a kernel buffer, and it ends up not. This endows a local attacker belonging to the operator group with an arbitrary write primitive in kernel memory. So the following code is sufficient to provoke a kernel panic. More precisely, the kernel tries to fill the data field residing at address 0 with the subchannel data from the CD-ROM. This is at least true on VMware virtualized environment, where the SCSI CD-ROM driver emulator returns 4 null bytes that are filled by the kernel in the data field, even though there's no media actually in the CD-ROM drive. Please note that this may not be the case on a physical FreeBSD host. But basically, they open dev CD0, then set up an octal to read 4 bytes to the address null. And when you run that, it will crash the machine.
Oops, not good.
First, we will consider an environment where SMEP is not supported or enabled. So that's some of the new processor memory mitigation stuff. In this case, the exploitation is trivial. One can simply nullify the upper bytes in the entry in the syscall table, map that address to userland, copy some shellcode there, and finally trigger code execution by invoking that corrupted syscall. In order to get this to work, we need to determine the address of the syscall table, or the specific entry you want to override. Namely, we need to resolve the address of the symbol SYSENT. Hopefully, FreeBSD provides FreeBSD provides a useful primitive to resolve kernel symbols, KLDSym. Hereafter, we rely on the snippet of code from CTERT. If you remember, one of the researchers working on FreeBSD stuff a couple of years ago, in his series of blog posts about FreeBSD kernel exploitation to resolve it. So they have a function called resolve, and they take the name of a kernel symbol called KLDSym, and they will get back the address of that syscall, or that symbol in the kernel. And what you get back is a sysint, or struct sysint, which has the number of arguments, the function that actually does the work, the audit events associated with it, and then any dtrace stuff and so on. As we can see, if we corrupt the upper bytes of the syscall member, we can redirect system calls to code mapped in userland. Basically, we overwrite the bit of memory that has the pointer to the function in the kernel that this syscall would normally invoke and make it invoke our own function over in userland. We chose to corrupt the no-sys syscall, so syscall number 0, which only purpose is to print out a message saying that that's not a supported syscall. So it's what you do when you call a syscall that doesn't exist in the kernel. So they resolve the address of the sysend, which is the syscall table. Then they add a couple of bytes to it or whatever, and call that same the broken IOCTL for the CD-ROM, and that will basically cause it to overwrite that much of the syscall table with their data. So they just set it up, find the address of the no-sys syscall, map their own function setup here, and then when they open CD0 and run their command here, they will overwrite part of the no-sys system call with their own, a pointer to their own function. And then when that runs, it will run some code and modify the credentials of the current process and set the UID, run UID and run group ID to 0. Suddenly, the application will now be running as root.
Hey, and that's the exploit.
And once it's doing that, it can do whatever it wants. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's quite some detailed source code there that reproduces that, or a source code discussion. And so, yeah, you should check out the full article if you're into this kind of exploit techniques or just wanted to know more details about the programming behind it.
Yeah. So they say, okay, that was the easy part. Well, now, how do we achieve code execution when SMEP is enabled? I think this is where the processor enforces the difference between kernel and userland code. Our strategy is to create several processes and write randomly the kernel memory with the hope to corrupt the UID of one of the forked processes. Our initial attempt was a total failure since in FreeBSD systems, unlike in Linux, the structure holding user credentials, ucred, is shared among all these child processes. So they say, hopefully we can trick the system so that it creates a fresh ucred structure for each forked process by calling setUID on the result of getUID. So they say, now to maximize our chances of corrupting the UID, we adopt the following strategy. We fork, what would it be, 16,000 processes? Am I reading that right? That'd be, 4,096 processes. I should have known.
Oh, hex. Sorry. Yeah, it's hex.
Yes.
Yeah.
Each process makes a call to setUID with the result of getUID to force the creation of a new credential structure. It is essential to make this call after the creation of all the processes so that the ucred structures are sprayed continuously in memory. As we can see from the figure below, we obtain a large memory area of these credential structures. So you fork all the processes, then you set all their IDs so that those will all be in a nice contiguous block. Once all those ucred structures have been created, the parent process invokes periodically the vulnerable IOCTL, starting from a base address determined by our debugging session. And each process checks in a loop to see if its UID has changed. So each of those 4,000 processes is like, am I root yet? Am I root yet? Am I root yet? Well, the parent just goes basically wild, randomly trying to overwrite that structure and set some process to root. And so with this proof of concept, they've successfully tested on the latest releases of FreeBSD. However, please note that the strategy is highly unreliable and will likely produce more panics than root access.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're literally just randomly overwriting bits of memory and hoping to hit the spot where one of those credential structures are, yes, you are more likely to crash the OS than you are to actually get root. But, if you give it enough tries, eventually you might get root.
Yeah. It's not the most reliable exploit, but definitely a good discussion.
That's if SMEP is enabled and available. If it's not there or not enabled, then this exploit is quite reliable. Of course, if you've patched your FreeBSD, then the exploit doesn't exist anymore.
Yes, run your periodic FreeBSD update, and then you should be on the safe side if you reboot between. So not just fetch, also install them, and then reboot if necessary. So you have the latest FreeBSD version, as the FreeBSD version command will tell you. All right, now we thought, let's do something different, at least in this episode, because remember, a long while ago, we had this interview with ourselves. People asked us questions and we answered them. And we thought one of the questions that we got a little later was about asking what kind of gear we're going to take to a conference. And then we were like, we actually never answered that. So this is correcting this mistake. So we thought about listing all, or not all of it, but at least some of our interesting conference gear that we take to conferences that is vital, more or less, to us to be on the road at the conference, or keeping it close so that we have it available when there is a need. And we split it up into Alan's gear and my gear. So I've listed, I bring a lot of stuff besides clothes and laptops, of course, or the one laptop that I have, the one old laptop, actually. So I picked 3 items that I think I will never be the same without. So the first thing is that's the recent one that I got, the Local Me, it's called. It's a G3 mobile travel hotspot and power bank. So it's for the cases where you're in a different country that you've never been before, and you don't know whether your wireless provider gives you the proper roaming, or if you have to pay horrendous connecting charges.
Horrendous rates for me, so that's why I have one of those, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. Sometimes you can rent SIM cards at the airport, and this little device can take foreign SIM cards, up to 2 of them. But you don't have to. So it can also connect to the GSM network of over 120 countries, according to the website. And initially, when you buy this device, it's not cheap. It's maybe $200. I'm not sure. So it gives you an initial credit of 1 gigabyte worldwide. So you don't have to buy a separate data package. You can just use up the 1 gigabyte package. But if you're in a specific country and you run out of that package or want to be a little bit longer in that country, then you look at packages they provide. So they have different packages, like a full day of local connectivity to the internet for a very low price. And depending on the country, it's cheaper than buying a SIM card at the airport. And the nice thing is that this just translate the GSM into the Wi-Fi, and you just pair it with your phone, and then this one gives you mobility on the road with the local network. It's also a power bank, so you can also charge your devices with it. It's a bit of heavy. It looks a little bit, if you look on the website that we linked in the show notes, it looks a little bit like an older iPhone, but it's very, very thick. That's where the battery goes. And it has a nice little interactive screen where you can just select what kind of network you want to be on, or you can also switch between the different SIM cards that are in there if you have some. So that's kind of a cool thing to have on the road.
So I have something similar, a little bit different. I have a Huawei E5770, which is a 4G LTE mobile Wi-Fi Pro thing. So same idea. It has a SIM card slot that you can put a SIM in. It gives that off as Wi-Fi. It has an Ethernet jack in it, which you can use in one of 2 ways. You can plug your laptop into it to get on the network without using Wi-Fi, which can be faster. And, if you don't have a good Wi-Fi chipset and you're trying to use FreeBSD or something, it's handy. But you can also do hey, my phone and my iPad, my laptop are all linked to this mobile Wi-Fi hotspot, but I'm in my hotel room. If the hotel room has wired Ethernet and I just plug it into this device, it will save my data and use the hotel's wired Ethernet, but I don't have to retrain all my devices. So it can become a wired access point as well. So you can use it as a bridge to get on the Wi-Fi, or you can use it to bridge the Wi-Fi to the wired LAN or whatever. And yes, you can charge it over USB, but you can also use it to charge your phone because it's a built-in battery pack as well. Both mine and Benedict's picks are in the show notes with links to buy them if you're interested. I think the Huawei one I bought was about 150 US. It doesn't come with any service or anything, but for that I bought separately from a company called Always Online Wireless, a $5 SIM card that works in 90 countries. And you just go to their website and say, I'm going to be in Belgium next week and I would like, a gig of data for 2 weeks, and it's like $15. Or, I want a month in Japan and it's this price. You can choose by the day in blocks of like 500 megabytes or for a month at different rates. So depending on how long you're staying, there's which one's the best is different. I like that because it means like as soon as I get off the airplane, I can get directions to things rather than having to stumble around and try to find and buy a SIM card.
Yes, yeah. You can have it right on the plane.
Because the device would let me just buy a SIM card and stick it in as well. If that is significantly cheaper than doing the prepaid thing, then that's an option. I always thought mine was probably had every feature I could ever want, but having dual SIM slots seems really useful. But mine doesn't have that, but yours does. Mine has an SD card slot, which I'm not I don't know if you can actually use it to store files or what. I've not actually investigated that functionality. But mine has a decent web interface, and you can tell it about your data limits, and it will stop you from going over if that is going to save you a lot of money or something.
Yeah, there are a couple of options around, and depending where you go or what kind of countries you frequent, that's certainly good to compare prices for. If your normal provider doesn't have any options in that country.
Yeah. Actually, I know in a recent trip to the US, a friend from Europe that was with me had some difficulty finding a reasonably priced SIM card in the US, since most of them were targeted at people who live here and want a SIM card forever, rather than somebody who wants a SIM card for 2 weeks and never wants to use it again.
Yeah, that's kind of bad.
But doesn't want to spend $40 US just to have data for 10 days.
Yeah, so either people have to stick very close to you so that they can piggyback on your connection, or you have to jump through some hoops.
But, great way to make friends at a conference is be one of the people who has internets coming out of their backpack.
Follow me around, everyone.
Yeah. Although I remember in Japan, so I'd gone to Japan a number of times and rented one of these mobile Wi-Fi hotspots and found it very useful. So I went and bought one because it's like, I want the same thing when I go to Europe and so on. And it's been very useful. Then when I went to Japan this year, I'm like, oh, I have to rent one anyway. Because it turns out I'm going to need 2.
Yeah, you were not alone there. Yeah.
Since I was not alone and we weren't always going to be together, it made sense to end up with 2 of them.
Yes. So one as a spare is good to have in case the other one breaks.
I will note that my one I owned is much newer and has a lot longer battery life than the rental one, which is a couple of years old and sees a lot more use than mine does.
Yeah. It's not. It's probably a different pocket every week. Okay, so this is our connectivity on the road. And the next thing that I always carry with me, I basically don't take it out of my pocket because I also use it sometimes at work, is the Mojix Power Bagel. We auctioned one off a while ago, and we actually met the lucky person who won this one. So this is, for people who have never heard it, it's the world's only travel power strip. So normally you go to a conference and there's not enough power for everyone, right? You either have to share or, hey, is your laptop charged already? Can I plug you out? Nah, it's not good. So bring a power brick. What a power brick is big and bulky in your baggage, and it's difficult to carry around. Might be some problems at the airport, so in checked baggage, so that's bad. So with the Mojix Power Bagel, it's a rounded one.
Yeah, so it's a power bar that's round, shaped like a bagel or a donut. In the center is the universal plug adapter that will make it fit whatever the wall socket looks like in the country you're in. And the power cord wraps around in the middle, around the circumference of the bagel. So you plug that into the wall, and then all around the outside you have power outlets that are uniquely shaped so that you can jam any country's plugs into it and it will power them. And I think it has a couple of USB outlets as well, right?
Yeah, 2 of them, USB 2 only at the moment.
Right, but there's no data, so it doesn't matter if it's USB 2 or 3. But I guess what you mean is not USB-C. But
yeah,
yeah, so you can also charge your phone and stuff off of it without an additional adapter.
Oh yeah.
But the roundness of it makes it more likely you'll be able to plug a couple of things in without the big adapters blocking each other and so on.
Yeah, the bulky bricks that people carry around. But that's good. So I had conferences where I just plugged this in and 3 other people could share the power with me and charge their phones and laptops. So that's very handy. And at airports, there's also maybe a shortage of power outlets, so you can share it with other passengers. That's a pretty nifty thing. I heard that they also have a new adapter in the middle, that the second version that offers even more country access. So I have to take a look at that. But so far, I bought 2, and I'm pretty happy with. There's a black one and there's a white one, and there's a US version that has mostly US power outputs in the middle. But the one that I have, the Bagel, is the international one that has the multi-power outlet.
So I have 2 different things for my setup on this. The charger for my Lenovo laptop. In Japan, I bought a replacement for the part that goes between the adapter brick and the wall. And instead of a standard US outlet, it has a thing that folds out into whatever different shape I need. Mostly lets me plug into anything in Europe or the UK or North America or Japan or whatever. And that works nice. Or I have, the regular wall wart plug adapters. Then the other thing I bought is it goes on the other side of the power brick, in line with which side does it go on? No, it goes on the wall side, never mind. But between the cable that goes to the wall and into the brick, you put this small insert, it's about this big, and it provides 2 Japanese outlets on the top and 1 on the bottom. Now, seeing as Japanese outlets are the same as American outlets, except for they don't have the ground prong, this means I can plug other devices in, or other people can plug their laptop in. Doesn't help so much for my European friends, where their laptops have a ground pin, but for most North American laptops that have no ground pin, it means that they can actually steal off my plug adapter, basically. But I've also used it to plug in my little USB charging device to charge, my cell phone and that 4G Wi-Fi hotspot device. And so that works nice as well. I've, in fact, once used it while not charging my laptop, actually, as an extension cord as well. Just using that bit of my laptop charging stuff to be able to make the phone charger be able to reach to the bed, because there was no plug near the bed, and I needed my phone to play my audiobook to fall asleep, and I needed to charge it while it was doing that. So yeah, that's what I do for power.
Yeah, that I like devices that have that are short and small and have multiple purposes, and that's true with the Power Bagel. It's also true with this next one. It's a cable. It's a charging cable at first sight, but you might think, well, I have 1,000 of those at home. But this one is different, because I also have charging cables. I had ones before those, but this one is nice. So this one is it's called a Charby Sense power cable. And this one has 3 distinct features that made it appealing to me. The first item is that it's longer than the normal charging cable. And the second thing is that it's plug it's a USB on one side, and the other one can have different outputs. I have the iPhone charger, that's the lightning cable, and I have another one for USB, micro USB. But this one I can plug in a USB and will always be right, because this is universal plug. You can plug it in each side as you like, and it will always fit. So this USB is not getting on your nerves. So it always be the first time the correct time. And then the second thing, it has a little button on the side, and it allows you, so if you plug in your, like say you plug in your phone into your laptop and charge it this way, then you can also transfer data with it. But with a press of a button, you can disable that data connection and let the charge run faster. So they have some data on their website that shows that you can charge with this cable a little faster than with normal cables, pressing the button. And there's a light indicator that shows you whether it's a slow charging source, whether you can, and if you have pressed the button, that you're charging twice as fast. And it also automatically cuts off once the charge device is reaching 100%. So it's not, if you charge overnight on the bedside table and it reaches 100%, then you don't need to charge further, and the cable automatically cuts off the power supply so that the battery doesn't die as soon as other devices or as other cables do. So that's why I bought it. I've used it for a couple of weeks now, and I will take it with me. It has a kind of a sturdier wiring, some kind of Kevlar coating, so it's a little bit.
I think it's just nylon, braided nylon.
Yeah, or nylon. Yeah, so it's pretty sturdy and a little bit thicker, but that doesn't bother me, and it nicely folds together as a charger.
What else is in my backpack? An embarrassingly large number of USB thumb drives. I didn't quite realize how many until I think it was 2 years ago or something, leaving the UK. And they decided they wanted to wipe down everything remotely electronic in my bag for explosives or whatever. And the number of USB sticks was slightly embarrassing.
Whoops.
And also, it's like, I didn't think I had quite that many Ethernet cables in my baggage, and so on.
Are you using the cables?
You mean the USB?
Yeah, the Ethernet ones.
Well, the Ethernet ones sometimes, yes. It's always a matter of, I might need one.
Yeah, just take another one.
I carry around a little switch, so I'm always going to need some cables to. What's the point of having 4 switch ports if you only have one one Ethernet cable?
Yeah, that's true.
I remember at the Dev Summit in France, I had 3 laptops all networked together doing stuff. And so, yes, that required 3 Ethernet cables. I also usually have a couple of protein bars in my bag because you never know. I think it was like, for example, at FOSDEM, I was staffing the booth.
Oh, yeah.
There was no way I was waiting in line for an hour to get lunch. So it's like, I'm going to have a protein bar and eat lunch in a couple hours once the crowd dies down or whatever.
Yeah, and have something.
Or actually, on the recent trip to California, we ate dinner a bit early. And so, it was like 10:30. And it's like, well, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep if I'm hungry. And I'm a little bit hungry. And so, protein bar.
We also both carry a little bit of support of VC3000 for after a conference. When we gave a talk, we throw one in and our throat is not as sore as it was before.
Well, in particular, 2 or 3 years ago at Asia BSD Con, I woke up the morning of my talk with a horrible cold and almost couldn't talk. But after 2 VC3000, which are these little cough drop type things that have 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C, I was able to complete my talk. And I was grateful for them. So yes, I always do have some of those on me. And I'm usually willing to share until the supply gets low.
Yeah. I mean, that's also one of the reasons why we carry so many different things, because at a conference, there's a huge chance that something might break or a cable is not working anymore, and then you can lend it to someone else, or someone else has a similar cable.
Yeah, like I think for a couple of years, I carried around one of the adapters you needed to connect a Mac to the projector, even though I didn't own a Mac, because it was just handy to be able to lend it to people. Of course, my newer Mac needs something different. And mostly I present up my FreeBSD laptop that has native HDMI and I don't need any adapters, and it's quite good. I also usually do have melatonin capsules, which just you put 1 or 2 of these under your tongue and let them dissolve, and it helps you fall asleep. Very useful for trying to get to sleep on the plane or even in the hotel after you've landed. Basically, tricks your body into thinking it's time to go to bed. So it's not a sleeping pill. It doesn't do that. It just is some of the chemical your body naturally releases when it thinks it's time for bed.
Yeah, the internal clock.
So it just helps a little bit. It's much more mild than something like a sleeping pill, which can make you groggy and so on.
To avert some of the jet lag.
Yeah, and other than a toothbrush, there's not much else in my backpack except for, I guess, my 2 laptops. I have a Lenovo X270, which runs FreeBSD 13. I bought the version with the biggest 6-cell cylinder battery. Between that and the 3-cell in the front of the laptop, get somewhere between 8 and 12 hours of battery life, depending how heavy you're running it. If you're running build world the whole time with turbo boost on, you're only going to get about 5 hours. But even that for FreeBSD is quite good.
Oh yeah, that's decent.
In addition to the regular Lenovo charging port, it can also charge off USB-C, which is super helpful. And yes, between my phone, my Mac, and this all charging off USB-C, I often only really worry about having the one charger. And then yes, the Mac, I've still kept my promise. I've never bought a Mac. But at VBSDCon 2017, CDW donated a 2016 MacBook Pro to the conference to do as a door prize raffle thing. It was, they filled a flower vase with computer parts and electronic things, everything from like little diodes and resistors up through sticks of RAM and a heat pipe heatsink thing from a server, all jammed in this jar. And it was, can you guess the number of jelly beans in the jar, or the number of individual components in this jar? And my guess was the closest to right. I guessed 384 plus 2, in case anybody else guessed 384. And I think the correct answer was 402 or something like that. And so I won the laptop. I use it mostly for email and video conferencing and stuff.
You had to get used to that one first, yeah?
I'm still not used to it. If you've seen, for example, I used it when leading a dev summit. I will use it to run the projector so I can have my laptop and do my work on it. And I'm like, hey, Brad, or somebody who knows how to Mac, how do you make this thing not go to sleep every 15 minutes? Or, why is the screen not working? It's like, put me in front of a FreeBSD machine and I can do whatever I want. The Mac is still very much a learning experience. Again, partly because I only use it when I'm traveling. Because otherwise, I'm sitting at my nice computers. Even my laptop. For work stuff, it gets a little more use now because it has all the VPN software and stuff installed on it. But in general, I use a desktop when I'm at home. And so my laptops only get used at conferences. But yeah, so the Mac, it resumes a bit faster and so on. So I use it to do email and video conferencing and some of the Microsoft-y stuff I have to do for work. Mostly I use that to save my battery and be able to use the FreeBSD machine to do FreeBSD stuff. But I do try to always do my presentations off my FreeBSD machine. And in general, works more reliably. Mostly because I can get the screen set up the way I want easily, whereas on the Mac, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, how do I do this thing? Yeah. So if you have something that we should always bring or couldn't live without, or what's your saver at any conference or on the road, then hey, send this to us. Might be interesting to have a look at it and maybe have it as some kind of feedback and questions. If you have an interesting item, gadget, gear, whatever, send this to feedback@bsdnow.tv as a link, or a link to the manufacturer website, or a little photo, and then we can cover it in a future episode, and other people could also benefit from seeing what cool things you can take on the road. All right, time for the Beastie Bits this week. We found an item, or YouTube video, more like, about replacing the Unix tradition with a warning, maybe rage-inducing. But you can take a look at that video if you're looking at some of the replacements, or to spark some discussion, a civilized one. So that's this video. And then we have installing OpenBSD over remote serial on the Atomic Pi.
A very small one. But yes, they're using serial to do the install. It's quite interesting. There's a video, or a pair of videos, and then there's some pictures with more detail showing it looks like they had to make the cable they needed to connect to this thing. Oh, I think it's because it has, or no, that's not that. Okay. I thought it was one of the ones that has serial over the audio port, which is always interesting, but that's not this.
Oh, it's very tiny. Okay, yeah, so look at that if you're interested in a tiny little board running OpenBSD.
Yep, and basically they show how to actually install OpenBSD on it, and then they should actually show it running with the NeoFetch.
Ah, yes, there's a screen. Nice. Then we have Zen2 and Dragonfly over at Dragonfly BSD Digest. They report that it's supported, and given how well Dragonfly supports SMP and the number of processors Zen2 supports, it's a no-brainer if you're in the market for a new server.
Yeah, so the new AMD Zen 2 architecture, I think, goes up to like 64 cores or something. And so, yes, it'd be quite interesting to see how well Dragonfly does at that compared to other OSs that haven't spent quite as much time on SMP.
And we also have improve docking on FreeBSD. So it's not what you think it is. It's not about Docker. It's about connecting your beloved ThinkPad to your docking station, the Ultra Base in this case. It's the X220 in that specific example.
Yep. So Yuki says this is his first baby steps into FreeBSD development. They say that they love their ThinkPad X220 and their Ultra Base docking station, which adds DisplayPort, keyboard, mouse, Ethernet audio, etc., as already connected to this convenient dock, and all I have to do is stick my laptop in it. And it really makes the experience a lot better since I'm currently a student and sometimes have to bring my laptop to school, but when I come home, my workstation is all set up. So they say, on Windows, when I dock my machine, it automatically switches the monitor as per my configuration and changes the audio device. However, on FreeBSD, nothing happens. Well, some stuff does happen in the background, but it doesn't actually change anything. Particularly, what FreeBSD does is only change the value of the ACPI_dock variable, the status, from 0 to 1, saying you are now docked. So what can we do about this? We can always have a while loop that checks ACPI_dock.0.status indefinitely, but that kind of dislike it. So since FreeBSD 5, FreeBSD has had a tool called devd that basically get event notification when things on the system change, and you can configure whatever you want to happen then. Basically, we can run userland programs whenever a kernel event happens, like when you enable Bluetooth, or in this case, when you dock your laptop. They say it's the equivalent to udev on Linux, but a lot saner. So why don't we take advantage of this? So after Googling around for solutions, I stumbled upon an email in a thread on the FreeBSD-mobile list about ACPI dock and devd. In that thread, a user wrote a diff that adds a call to tell devd when the machine is docked and undocked. Well, the diff kind of worked as is, but we need to make a couple of changes to match, today's version of devd, which is a bit different than when the patch was written. They contacted the original author if he wanted to get the patch submitted himself, but didn't receive a response, so submitted it to the FreeBSD Bugzilla. And he also put it up on his personal GitLab. And basically, they say you match when ACPI subsystem dock has this problem, when it changes from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, it will call the script etc ACPI_dock and the value that it switched to. And then in that script, you can just say, hey, we're now docked or we're undocked, and make the changes that are required. We change the audio device without needing to be inside the X server, or you can set display equals :0 and then run programs, and so on. So they made a program called dock-trigger, which is another POSIX shell script that listens for the USR1 signal, and when it gets it, it does what it needs to do.
Cool. That might be useful to a couple of people with docking stations.
Yep. So they switch the sound unit over. They run xargs to switch it to turn the DisplayPort off and switch the internal to auto and so on. And they reset their polybar display bar tool and update their window manager and so on. Or I guess, yeah, when they dock it, they will switch the DisplayPort on and the built-in screen off and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Nice to have. And we want to remind you about 2 upcoming conferences in the BSD space. The first is VBSDCon from September 5 to the 7th in Reston, Virginia. The early bird ends August 15th. Maybe by the time this show airs.
Yes. So if you want to save $25 off the price, you need to register soon or now.
Yeah, like stop the recording and listen to it later, and after you register, continue. While you're on the subject of registering, there is 2 weeks later, EuroBSDCon 2019, from September 19 to the 22nd in Lillehammer, Norway. This year, we're traveling around every year with EuroBSDCon.
Yeah, we've told you about this one a couple of times, and it turns out you've probably missed the early bird price. But hurry up, because the late price keeps going up, and so register now.
Yeah, you want to be there. Yeah, don't miss this conference. So it's time to get right into our feedback and questions for this week. And we have a little message from our very own JT with congrats in the subject. Goes like this. Congratulations, guys. We did it. Since we've run out of questions, it's obviously logical to assume that we've answered them all and there are no more questions remaining. Otherwise, someone would have emailed them in, right? So it's only logical that we've answered every BSD question ever. Group high five, take a break, sit back, let out a sigh, and bask in the knowledge that there are no more questions left. Yes, this is a very empty segment at this point because we don't have anything from you.
Yeah, well, it turns out recording a lot of episodes all at once results in burning through the little bit of feedback we get a little quicker.
Yeah, we're draining that quickly. So don't let us sit on the dry for long. Anything in the BSD world, any question, any comment that you have about the show, any ideas, topics, maybe your gear discussions that we had in this episode a little earlier, or stories that you always wanted to mention, send all of this to feedback@bsdnow.tv. It's feedback@bsdnow.tv, a very short, memorable email address where you can send all this thing, and then we have something to fill future episodes. That's why at this point, we're done with this one. And thanks for listening, as always. And see you, hear you, whatever, next time.